Welcome to the podcast series, Breaking Barriers, Substance Abuse, and Addiction in the Indigenous Communities. I'm your host, Akshi, and today we'll be exploring the pressing issue of substance abuse and addiction within Indigenous communities. This complex problem demands careful attention and effective solutions. Join me as I delve into limitations of current approaches, emphasize the importance of cultural considerations, and propose recommendations for more culturally sensitive and effective strategies.
Substance abuse and addiction in Indigenous communities have far-reaching consequences, impacting not only individual health but also cultural preservation and community well-being. Despite efforts to address this problem, the existing steps and systems designed to combat substance abuse and addiction among Indigenous people have proven inadequate. To adequately tackle this issue, it is essential to reassess and revamp current approaches, taking into account unique cultural factors that influence the Indigenous experience of addiction. By recognizing the value of Indigenous culture and actively involving Indigenous voices in the search for solutions, we can strive for meaningful and sustainable progress in combating substance abuse and addiction within these communities. One of the primary limitations of current approaches is the failure to consider the unique cultural factors that play within Indigenous communities. Indigenous culture, histories, and beliefs shape their experiences with addiction, and it is crucial to recognize and respect these cultural nuances. However, mainstream addiction treatment programs often overlook traditional healing practices, spiritual connections to the land, and communal support systems that hold significant value in Indigenous culture. In an article by the National Library of Medicine, the importance of promoting connections to traditional cultures and the effectiveness of culturally focused and community-owned services are emphasized in enhancing public health and addressing substance abuse-related issues. Another significant factor contributing to this insufficiency of current steps and systems is the historical and ongoing trauma experienced by Indigenous communities. The devastating impacts of colonization and forced assimilation have caused emotional and psychological wounds across generations, resulting in high rates of substance misuse and addictions among Indigenous populations. To address substance abuse effectively, a comprehensive approach that acknowledges and responds to underlying trauma is necessary. This requires trauma-informed care that recognizes historical injustices, promotes cultural revitalization, and integrates traditional healing practices. According to the National Institute of Drug Abuse, Indigenous people have experienced higher rates of substance abuse and addiction than any other racial or ethnic group in the United States and Canada. These disparities are created by the lack of resources and systemic inequalities, including limited access to healthcare services, cultural biases in treatment settings, and socioeconomic barriers. To address these issues, it is crucial to prioritize the unique needs of Indigenous communities and advocate for increased resources, policy changes, and collaborative efforts that promote culturally sensitive services, expand access to care, and empower Indigenous communities in decision-making processes. In conclusion, the existing steps and systems to address substance abuse and addiction in Indigenous communities are insufficient and require urgent reevaluation. By recognizing cultural factors, addressing historical trauma, and tackling systematic inequalities, we can develop more effective approaches to combat substance abuse and addiction within Indigenous communities. It is vital to involve Indigenous voices, prioritize cultural sensitivity, and advocate for policy changes and increase resources to ensure interventions are tailored to the unique needs and strengths of the Indigenous community.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Breaking Barriers, Substance Abuse, and Addiction in the Indigenous Communities. Stay tuned for more future episodes where I'll explore further topics related to this pressing issue.